On this episode of Impekable Minds, we have David Wachtendonk, Senior Director of Innovation at RightWorks. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Pek. Good to be here.
I've been seeing on LinkedIn that you've been vibe coding for quite a bit. Tell me more about some of the credentials, like some stats and credentials.
Yeah, I've been vibe coding for the better part of a year and a half now. On Lovable, I've diamond level vibe coding status. I don't recall off the top of my head what the Replit version is, but kind of their senior level vibe coder as well, which I'd be curious on how they're. Do we all have the same senior level status, or are they actually basing it on any sort of usage or best practice patterns? But yeah, have a couple of statuses with Replit and Lovable.
One of my engineers got an annual thing last year saying he was one of the top 5% of Claude user in terms of token usage, which is quite amazing. And then recently I've kind of hit a wall where I hit my max limit for the day. So I know, okay, I'm using AI enough. This is just on Anthropic, and then I have to switch to other things so that I'm not blocked on my work. And I'm on the 200 plan, so I have quite a lot of tokens. But for me, it was a milestone of, yes, I now feel like I'm using AI a lot in my work. So it's hitting that. Tell us about your position at work. And to be clear for the audience, you're not formally trained as a software engineer. Is that correct?
No, my training comes more as an entrepreneur, and then in the corporate world as a product manager all the way up through senior director. I was a director of product and then took a senior director of innovation role while at RightWorks. I'd say more as like the classic product guy who, has been paying for software projects. This is how you and I got connected back in, what was it, like 2010, 2011, where I was the product/idea guy, and it was one of the first non-engineering oriented people that you enabled into our secretive Midnight Doers Club. So it was a person, I think not to put words in your mouth, but what you appreciate is I was actually paying engineers to do work versus trying to con a friend who had engineering skills to do the work for free. And that was sort of my pass into the club to connect and network with all the awesome people we had in Chicago.
Yes. And for the other listeners, I claim credit for introducing Dave to his co-founder, Chris, and then they formed a company, sold that company to Constant Contact. So that's kind of like my, when people ask. So in your own words, what has vibe coding enabled you to do that you were not able to do before?
To connect the dots from an idea to working software in minutes, even if it's just a design POC. Like Lovable has a great concept of design and build. A lot of them do now, but just that idea to have this concept in your brain and go, boy, I wonder if, and then realistically within 30 minutes to actually have clickable working prototype, and whether or not you put Supabase or Railway or, working database behind it, but just to see like that working on a page, and did that actually could it actually solve a problem that's replaced hours a week of doom scrolling on TikTok to now my wife saying, hey, are you going to come out of the office and come hang out with the family? Because you've been in your office for 10 hours today. Like a good bulk of that time has been coding. That's been one great point, is just to be able to see ideas come to life relatively real. The other is my empathy as a product person for those that are really good engineers. I feel like I knew enough to be dangerous as a product person to hold my engineering partners accountable for like, hey, is that a day, a week, or a month of effort? So this really does, help provide even more understanding when we're going from POC or into working software. And lastly, I now have more empathy and understanding for the concept of refactoring. In my previous life, the engineering team would come back to me like, hey, let's keep on the feet. Let's more features. And they would bring up this concept of refactoring. And I always just thought that was like BS for like, hey, we need a few days of a break here. And I find now in my vibe coding journey, I probably spend, I don't want to say it's 50-50, but probably 60-40, 60% of the time thinking about a new feature for a project I'm on, and then 40% of the time creating prompts around the concept of refactoring, or even using tools like SonarQube, where I have duplication or crummy code or multiple nestings. A year ago, I knew what none of those words meant. And I'm just a vibe coder, like now the concept of like when it puts everything into 5,000 lines into like one specific file, just not a good best practice. That just gets super unwieldy. And now I understand that we get it out quick, but then if you want to have maintainable, not necessarily scalable, maintainable code that's not going to keep throwing you bugs every few days, actually take that to slow down. Okay, great. Let's harden, refactor, and then scrub out, because this stuff is so good at getting it done quickly, it'll throw so much unnecessary cruff. You have to start to peel back all the layers. My appreciation on that as well.
I hear words like hardening, refactoring. A lot of vibe coders in general, like these topics don't come up. Yeah, thanks for that. And I remember we were using SonarQube in engineering back in the day, and we had automated CI/CD where SonarQube is just checking code quality automatically as part of check-in. That was a standard practice. I had a question. I had a thought. Said you had empathy for developers, but with vibe coding can produce stuff so fast. Do you feel it's skewing your perception of estimates when engineers say one thing?
100%. Yeah. Well, I also just say it depends on the culture and how much AI is being adopted into the team. So my journey, now my day job is like I vibe code full time. Like that's my job, support the office of the chief revenue officer here at RightWorks. And my job is to help build pipeline for our direct sales team, or in some cases, our trying to find new opportunities that come through our indirect sales team. And alternatively, how do we help increase our close one ratio? So I'm a stand individual contributor now, and for the most part, contain all of my own applications. And that was until all of a sudden, some of those ideas that were POCs started to say, wow, has the potential to provide real business value. Some of the data to make the applications even better required integrations with Salesforce and Databricks and all of our data lived. And this is in the journey that I'm in now. Is it's really cool to build a POC on your own as a standalone developer and be able to demonstrate that we can deliver better leads or a cool looking business proposal. But now it's at that next level of my apps are now being evaluated by senior architects and the DevOps team and the security team, and the humble pie you have to eat when you're going into those conversations. And frankly, the embarrassment that I know I had, which is learning how to go from just in Replit, Lovable, or even if you're using Codex or Claude Code, how easy it is just to deploy to Supabase or Railway or wherever, Neon, wherever you want it to go, to then do it in an enterprise situation. That's where I am right now, is like, had built some pretty cool POCs. And then now how do you actually deploy those within an enterprise environment? It's a drastically different process. So that's where I'm starting to coincide now. Probably not interfacing. I'm still really responsible for the code, but relying, especially with knowing I'm sitting on, in some cases, some pretty sensitive information, I want that team of people around me. I want them to find those flaws and help me understand those best practices, and just look like a complete noob when they're talking about how my APIs are structured, or why did you leave that like no doors were necessarily left open, but just those best practices. So then you can be in the room and speak confidently about your product and your code.
I think that's the gap, right? That some folks need to realize that it's great to get to that POC level, and you do have this appreciation for having DevOps, security, stuff that's needed, enterprise hardening.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Your transition from product management, that's so many disciplines that needed to be encompassed. Like that's unfair to try to say vibe coders now need to know all of this. Not necessarily. I think your role is to be that entrepreneur, visionary idea, test those ideas quickly, to also put that burden of, you also need to be able to be DevOps and cyber and BTO. That's not realistic, I don't think.
No. But this is new, unless you're like in one of the FANG companies or one of the big four consulting companies that have sort of figured this out. But I'd say for the average B2B SaaS company, or the average $25 to $100 million company, most of these teams were designed to support the engineering organizations and the product organizations that they had. So this is opening up a whole new challenge, which most, I would say all, want to be really good business partners and love the idea that we can go, we all want to ship something that's going to be used by lots of people and provide lots of value. I don't know anyone that's like, I want to build something that doesn't matter, and I want to spend my day working on something that's not going to contribute. So they want to figure this out. The challenge is that with whether or not it's ISO or SOC 2 or pick whatever frameworks, NIST, whatever we put in place to ourselves, have been designed to support how we've done software engineering for the last 10 or 20 years. So I think there's this opportunity for organizations to evolve where we're trying not to reduce the standards. It's like, what are the standards of which our CTO likes to use? Like, you have to be this high to ride, and whether or not that's a vibe coder or an engineer on his team, you have to be able to produce this level of quality. But I think within our enterprise environments, there's an interesting opportunity for how do we structure these things that are these prototypes next to production level software. And I know we haven't figured it out yet. And whether or not that means you're going to have to run like 2 Azure instances, one for your AI generated applications, and then next to your traditional. I think those are going to blend pretty quickly. But I still think it's the innovation problem of how do we balance those early prototypes against the things that need all the rigor, all the requirements, and all the security. We're still getting the benefits of anyone that can, in theory, let something in front of a customer and get to 50, 100, 200 users, and then come those gates to go all the way through versus just to have to go through all the policy checks sometimes can take a month, 2 or 3 months. So it just depends on the regulatory space that you're in, I think.
And with your vibe coding, do you have a concept of, are you thinking about like dev, staging, and production as well?
I do now. When I started, mostly in Lovable and just would go. Replit, I think, does spin up dev and prod for you, but I believe Lovable, you call it out specifically. They're just going to give you one place to deploy your code. So definitely a learning on, yes, most of my stuff is I kind of am comfortable just it's optimizing for speed. So it's a pain in the butt to manage multiple environments. But as we're going through now, it's definitely learning, trying to teach myself those concepts of, yeah, even if I don't necessarily need the multiple environments, trying to understand why we have the different environments, what are the pros and cons we have from that. And also that's more speaking to now the enterprise experience of I might want to make 10 deploys a day, but that's not necessarily going to work in the environment that I have to ship production software in. I do now. And then also just having local going as well. A year ago, I definitely never ran a local version of anything. So now I can see it working locally. But again, that's the beauty of some of these apps is you don't even need a local running because they give you the previews models, the notion of local. That's more happening now as I'm in Cloud Code, in Codex, which don't necessarily give you like that in-app browser experience. So that in those cases, just spin the local up so you can see changes in real time.
I really want to dig into what you've learned in vibe coding. You're a Diamond Lovable user. I'd love to synthesize or get from you what your best practices and tips are.
A few best practices that I now think about a lot is you have to have a product requirements doc. If you're just going to any of these applications and you're like, build me this application, you're going to put in 3 to 4 sentences. The quality of whatever your V1 is going to get is going to be way worse than if you pick your favorite flavor there, whether or not it's ChatGPT, Claude, or Perplexity, and just think through your problem statement you're trying to build. Even above that, I would challenge you to think about, are you building a little thing to tinker with, or are you building a thing that's going to solve a problem for a customer? And that's probably where I am now is all this stuff is so easy to build. Are you doing this? What's the goal of why you're building it? I just got off the phone with a colleague before this call, and it's this coming up with the time to learn these tools. So some of this just might be, have your objective. Is this for working software for me to learn and explore or play with a new tool? So first, you got to have a PRD. It's so easy now with whatever your idea is. Basically tell it, hey, I need a PRD for this concept. And I now spend way more time up front before, in theory, a line of code has been written, really understanding what are we trying to build. I also now use Linear into my workflow. So Linear is the task management solution that has command line interface and almost all the tools. So I also then start to structure my projects around tasks. So otherwise you can just get going with any of these products and the scope creep will just become insane. Start with a PRD, sketch out what your MVP is going to be, and then in the MVP, come up with some phases.
When you say sketch out, what do you mean?
Sketch out now in a couple of ways. Figma has some amazing MCP plugins with both Claude and Codex. So even spending time in Figma Make is awesome, but also you can just be working in Figma and see the concepts. It depends where I'm at in my month-end cycle too on how many tokens I have left. So if I know I have like tons of credits and it's still have a week left in the month, I'll burn more in like the design just directly with code. But as I'm getting to the end of the month, it's going back to like classic engineering and product best principles, right? Get your product requirements doc. I talk a lot of in my prompts around defining the information architecture within both the PRD and also the workflows like we would have done with Balsamic or on napkins or backs of papers just to like design those key experiences. Also on the upfront, I now have some pretty hefty defining your agent MD if you're in Codex or your Claude MD if you're in Claude. If you're starting that project and you don't drop in your stock MD files specific to the agent that you're in, that's where you end up sometimes in some bad cases around security or authentication or your data models because, I usually actually just store it in Notion, which is my kind of stock for any project, regardless of what I'm doing. And that's where I try to put in a lot of my guardrails, again, around security, authentication, data models, what we're trying to get done. Otherwise, you end up having to back out of those things after you've already got 6 or 7 pages built in your application and some early stuff built, and you just end up in a much better spot. It's the PRD. It's trying to think through your information architecture. It's your MD files. And a lot of this, it's still pretty quick to jump in because you just want to get the immediate gratification of what does it look like and does it work? So just trying to get those things done in advance. Lastly is skills. So skills are easy now to install across. Codex just included skills last week in their update that they pushed out. Claude's had that for a while, either at the project level or just within those environments, just having those skills set up. And those could be around whether or not it's, engineering or data analysts, like relying on those stock skills have been helpful too, just before we get too far down into the project.
Dig deeper into the skills. Well, you said engineering skills, data analysis skills. Just tell me more. What are some of the go-to skills that you?
Yeah, front-end design skills are important, and a lot of those are taking, how do you just not have your app look like another vibe-coded app? So it has a lot of anti-patterns of what are all the common patterns that something puts into a vibe-coded app. So it has a lot of parameters around mostly like what not to do and those common mistakes that, they're not even mistakes, but they're just like now so recognizable. So just trying to have some of those anti-patterns get done. Not always super critical if you're doing something just to muck around with it, just to see an idea, but if you're doing something that customers are going to use, or you're doing something for a client, it's worth just trying to have that level of polish. Another interesting one has been around user research. This will even feed my PRD. I forget if it was a Claude out of the box or one that I found, but a pretty robust user research skill that will, crawl the internet, do extensive research just on the problem statement that you have, be it around, the ICP or the pain point you're trying to develop, just to give you that base level of intelligence. I also just played with Mirofish. So Mirofish is an open source project that will spin up a team of agents, and imagine like you could go run 100 user interviews and it'll do all the scenario and all the modeling. So you host it yourself, spun it up on Manus because they can do a fully hosted instance. You put in the problem statement, you feed it a couple of documents, which it trains it on, and then you could tell it how many agents you want to spin up. So in the use case I did, it actually spin up the synthetic user interviews with the ICP that we were trying to explore. So then it went and it replicates, they call them simulations on the concept of the app you're thinking about or the research that you're wanting done. And it'll actually give you like, hey, is this pro or con? Does this resonate with the little sub agents that it spun up? And we'll give you a nice research report on, hey, based on 6 rounds of talking to 15, I think mine had 15 initial projects, kind of like half and half of the 2 ICP we were thinking about. Does the pain point and potential value proposition of what you were talking about, does it resonate? And it's synthetic, it's all made up, but was based on some additional research that I brought in. So that was just another kind of before the build, just great way to think about what value are we trying to project.
Yeah, I like that, right? I think so much vibe coding makes it so easy that you have an idea, you just go ahead and do it. I always would say from like 30 years ago, the problem with engineers is if you can build something, your predilection is to just go ahead and build it and not do any of this research. And nowadays I'm a little more tempered, and having even synthetic data based on internet research to simulate that seems really interesting. So Mirofish, thank you for that. That's a really good tip. Whenever I have a new idea, I should just throw that against something like this.
I wouldn't say it's a replacement for going to talk to 5 or 10 people
Oh,
in your
yeah.
ICP and having the conversation, but I found a great output of that was, can you now help me structure a topic guide for 10 interviews I should run with human beings, given if human beings are the target? Maybe awesome if bots or if agents are the subject matter, probably great feedback, but then it can actually like spit out the topic guide, could spit out a quantitative survey that you would want to run. It was like the P0 ahead of the quant and qualitative conversations you might have.
As an entrepreneur, if you were out today spinning up a new company, what does that look like compared to, say, when we met in 2010?
Oh man, you're going to be able to save. Back in the day, right? I started building applications for my first company in 2003, 2004-ish. And my first sort of, like I bootstrapped my first company startup in 2010. Just to get started, I was having to spend $10, $20, $30,000 just to have some working software to put in front of a prospect, which I know I've talked to folks a little bit older. They had said, well, we used to have to spend $250,000 to $500,000 and buy our own servers. We came up upon the age of, we no longer had to buy servers because AWS existed and maybe like early days of Heroku. But I think that's where this is now. What I would say to an entrepreneur is the concept of your software is no longer probably the value that you're going to, that is how you ultimately deliver value, but now to entrepreneurs, I would say, like, first, you should focus on building your audience. And whether or not that's starting a podcast or building a newsletter or building an audience on LinkedIn or social media, that will be the differentiator, because people are going to want to buy from people who they admire or believe have good ideas or are out in the world, versus the commoditization of software. Wall Street's calling it the SaaS apocalypse. But I think a version of that will be true for, those like non-system critical systems. Do I see a world where people are, going to vibe code a payroll application? Like, maybe, probably, in that like highly regulated, compliance focused, I think those apps are probably still pretty secure. But then as you start to like as you go further away from the core of that, that'll become easier to erode, and where people could purpose build, right? We're no longer constrained to what Salesforce can give us. We can actually get what we want in a matter of weeks and a few months.
You've briefly touched, it came up in conversation, but what is your preferred stack these days? And then what would you recommend for a new vibe coder listening, what they should start with? Because you've had at least a year of heavy vibe coding.
Yeah. So my two stacks right now are balanced between Codex and Claude Code. And I like to pit them against each other. On a given day, played with Cursor as the IDE. I found that just Codex and Claude Code can give me what I want there. Even just Claude Code, like out of terminal. I found that just the Codex app itself is pretty great, not in terminal. I would say I do. And then we talked before we started record, we hit those daily limits. So sometimes I hit a daily limit, but I also think that the diversification of thought of one versus the other is helpful, especially when it is time to refactor. I'll tend to build with one and then have the other refactor. I think it's no different than having, in the old days, we'd like pair program on things.
Two
I never did
engineers.
with it. Right. We remember we'd have two engineers working on the same thing. So I think using them with, or sometimes pitting them against each other, I think is helpful. And I take all the suggestions, but just to get their perspective on what the concept was. And then more recently, starting to include Figma MCP into each, because those don't necessarily have the user interface or the preview concept. So seeing some of those more complicated designs and concepts, especially when you're trying to build something beautiful and polished, I tend to see that in Figma, because you can move things around like at the pixel level versus when you're trying to like make the prompt to like make, like the minuscule change. It tends to get those things wrong and takes a little bit harder. Going backwards, then I'd say before I jumped into those terminal-based applications, I then was working more in Replit. Replit was a little bit more sophisticated than Lovable, because it does have the shell interface. So you can start to get a little closer to how you can kind of see how things are being built. You can start to experiment with either Codex or Claude Code as an alternative to Replit, mostly because this Replit just got expensive. I really like the concept, the product, how they bundle both the IDE with the databases and everything you need in one box. But I just found it expensive, and I was even at the upper tier, and I'm still hitting limits and having usage increases and everything else. So in that world, sort of was forced, when I didn't want to pay hundreds of dollars per month, would then start to layer it. Initially, it was free Claude Code, and then eventually paid the pro versions, because it was always like free by $20, but then going to like the $100 a month plan.
Yeah.
And then the initial journey was just in Lovable. And I think Figma's Make is another really nice, easy place to start, just to like starting to do the initial prompting, just seeing how ideas come to life and how do you avoid the wicked spirals you would get in when the apps just aren't working and you're getting the continuous bugs and all the issues that come.
So when you're working with Codex, and by the time you get to Claude Code, do you already have, of course, you have the PRD, you've had the research, you've synthesized. Do you also feed it the make designs?
Yeah, I find when I'm starting a project now, I actually just did it again this morning on a concept I was working on. I found on the initial designs, I don't tend to get the best results out of Codex or Claude Code for the V1 POC. And it could just be that maybe my PRDs aren't good enough. And it could just be my working style, but I did just again tried both Lovable. I actually kind of spun it up in 3 instances to see which would, based on the same PRD, gave it to 3 different applications, and just wanted to see what it would come up with for unique ideas to display the UI. So spun it up in Lovable, I spun it up in Make, and I also spun it up in Manus just to see what it would come out of the box in 10 minutes or less. I didn't plan to do any of the actual engineering in those applications. I just wanted to see the visual design concepts that they had. And then from that, a lot of, either taking screenshots or mostly screenshots. Technically in Manus, it did have access to the repo, so it could have pushed something up if it wanted to. But even today, I'll still go back to some of those earlier systems just because I think it's almost, I don't want to say it's better, but I tend to just get better results in trying to get to the early visual design concept.
Thank you so much. Well, we've gotten a lot of good insights, so I think this is a great natural place to be. I do want to add, I've been playing with Google Stitch as a design tool. I would say Lovable for design. Maybe it sits between Lovable, complete front end, back end as well, to Figma kind of design mostly focused. That's the best way I can describe it. It's like Figma meets before Make, Figma meets Lovable. You might find another place to iterate on design there. It's gotten good success for me so far. And
Yeah.
I played with Make early on. My issue is I'm such an early adopter. I'll play with something and then it sucks on the initial version and I'll forget it for a while. For example, Manus. I was an early adopter of Manus. I tried to do this lead gen thing, had it have it automate something in Sales Navigator, and it couldn't do that. And then I forgot about it for a while, and then I went back, and then the same task now works. You got to revisit. Things are moving so fast that you should, even the tools that maybe you've written off are pretty good now.
Yeah. That's good closing advice for anyone listening is we maybe have the benefit now of the 10,000 hour rule. I don't think exactly 10,000 hours, but a lot of hours. And I talk to a lot of people, which I just don't even know where to start, or I just don't have the time. And we had a thought leader on and for RightWorks last year. I think her name is Jody Padar, and she's an influencer in the space. And I think her feedback was great, was like, regardless of your role in the company, and whether or not you're using, even just on your personal machine, pay for the tools and invest the time. Like that's the only way you're going to learn these things. And whether or not the tool worked the first time, it's not about if it worked. It's just about that beginner's mindset and trying the new tool. And you could just have the same prompt. Like if you had that same thing, trying it on a few different applications, but just trying it, write down what worked or what didn't work. And then keeping that list, because we're all getting these ideas. Like it's a fire hose of things coming out, not from our LinkedIn feeds, but also from the news and everything we're hearing. There's always the latest and greatest model. There's always the next best tool. Where do I even start? And half of it, keeping the list of things that were interesting, carving out that half an hour to 45 minutes, trying it out. And if you just did that every day, I basically reskilled my entire career in the matter of a year. So now I'm a individual contributor vibecoder for my job. And a year ago, I would have thought that would have been impossible. And it is possible. So you just have to do the work and continue to learn.
Outside of building these as an individual contributor, how are you using AI in your daily life, whether it's personal or in your work, outside of the POCs and building applications?
I use it every single day. Right now, my oldest, if you can believe this, Pek, Mason's going to college next year. So we're doing final college selections. So even as simple as we are looking at two different universities and trying to build how do I frame like these two different colleges are very different to my teenager, he's 17 going on 18 years old. And how do I help convey like the differences in these universities? So like just doing that sort of research. So I think that's probably not the best one, but I'd say personally, I don't know. I nerd out. Like I did a thing on LinkedIn of like my bookcase behind me. I was like, I wonder if I could have it build me a Notion. I wanted like a catalog of all my books. So that was just like novel and dumb, but I took snap pictures of each of the piles, fed it to Claude Cowork. And I said, let's make a digital bookcase. Actually, that was an idea you had back in
I know,
the early
Shelf Love.
aughts. Remember Shelf Love?
Totally.
Took photos, and that'd be kind of cool to have because I have all these books, and like what if I can actually create some cards or something to like let me refresh on these books. So I just try to find those kind of novel ideas. Same thing with wine. My wife and I like to drink wine, so I always try to remember, what bottle. I know there's Vivino, which is an application, but it just doesn't really do it for me. So even if I'm at the store, snap a picture with ChatGPT of the bottle. It has in my preferences all of our favorite bottles. It knows that, this is going to be close to that year and that flavor based on the price point. Yeah, you're going to like this, that sort of stuff. So before I'd probably use Google and get taken down a rabbit hole versus this is just like, this is what it is. This is why you're going to like it or why you won't like it, and it help to guide direction and that sort of stuff.
Very cool. How are you thinking about your children's futures in the age of AI, and how are you helping them navigate AI and adopt it, if any at all? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Thinking a lot about it now as we're looking ahead to the cost of college education, $50,000+ per year. So I would say thinking through with Mason in particular, what major he was thinking about. So he's going to probably go into school for business or entrepreneurship. The school he has, a criteria for me was like they either had a program in artificial intelligence or most certainly were like AI forward in their thinking versus those that are still looking at it. Like when we went to school, it would have been, well, if you didn't use the encyclopedia and if you got any source material from the internet, like immediately it was considered, it was discredited versus just trying to find those universities that are forward looking. And then also just thinking through the majors. If I feel fairly good between entrepreneurship, business, and artificial intelligence. If he's in that category of bachelor's degree, that there'll be a future. And the other, just back to what's the policies of the university? Are they cracking down on it? Or are they actually teaching kids how to use it practically? Separately from my younger kid, I think it's just trying to teach them how to use it properly. So there's always going to be the use case of, oh, I forgot to write the paper and I'm going to use it to write my paper. That's not great, right? But how do you use it to help it be your tutor? How do you help it more practically, not to do your homework, but to show you the homework, to get the self-guided experiences and stuff from the AI? I just think them trying to learn and incorporate it, but in all the right ways. There's a lot of bad ways they can use it, but just trying to think through the right applications. Because I think the high schools in particular are struggling because I don't know that they have the policies in place yet to actually incorporate. I think they're coming up with ways to moderate what's coming in from grading and doing, monitoring the homework. And they have tools to see if AI participated in the generation. I don't know that they're necessarily teaching kids today yet in high school how to be practically applying it in safe and secure ways.
Right, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Dave. This has been a very great conversation as always, whenever we get together. And we learned a lot, and hopefully this is very useful to the audience.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right.